Two words, Baptists and ethics. They don't always seem to go together, but Mitch Randall, who heads the Baptist Center for Ethics, will tell us more about how they do. Hello, I'm George Mason. Welcome to Good God, conversations that matter about faith and public life. I'm pleased to be able to welcome to Good God today my good friend and colleague, Mitch Randall. Mitch, good to have you with us.
George, it's great to be here.
Thank you. Mitch is the recently appointed executive director of what's called the Baptist Center for Ethics.
Correct.
Now, the Baptist Center for Ethics, to many people out there in the world, that almost sounds like an oxymoron in today's culture, Mitch. Let's be honest.
Yeah, that's absolutely
true. You and
true.
I've been Baptist a long time, and I'll bet that most people out in the wider world don't think Baptist and ethics
at the same time
going together. So are you like a watchdog, or what exactly is the Baptist Center for Ethics?
Right. Well, thank you for asking. First of all, it's an honor to be here with you and talk about these weighty matters that we're dealing with as a people of faith. The Baptist Center for Ethics for 26 years has been educating Baptists when it comes to some of the most important issues that Baptists have been dealing with. It was born out of the Baptist controversy of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Our founder, Robert Parham, after being dismissed from the Christian Life Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention, founded the Baptist Center for Ethics to help Baptists understand ethics and issues from a more moderate to progressive standpoint. Right. And so we've been educating and providing materials for Baptists dealing with issues such as racism, such as Baptist-Muslim relationships, the judicial system and the flaws that we find in our penal system. Right. And so really helping create the framework for Baptists to understand some of these issues. But to go back to your original point, we Baptists certainly have earned the reputation of ethics and Baptists going together. That seems to be a contradiction.
Right, because we become sort of famous in the media for bad behavior, right, and for also theology that excludes people, that continues to seemingly favor one group over another. You know, when I think you and I were being educated in Baptist life, ethics seemed to be an option over here, a kind of an elective, so to speak.
Right.
So there was the center of the Christian tradition and church life and Baptist life. And then if you can get to it, if you have time to address certain issues over here of ethical concern, then you do that.
Right.
But I think these tumultuous times have now really forced us to examine whether that's really true, and certainly I don't agree that it is. I think nowadays we recognize that every statement we make, every relationship we have is an ethical one, right?
Yeah,
it's about truth or beauty or goodness somehow or other. And so whereas a Baptist Center for Ethics might have been a luxury over here on the one hand, now it's really speaking to the very heart of church life and preaching and academic life and all of that as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And that is one of the reasons that for the first 26 years of our existence, we were known as the Baptist Center for Ethics. We now currently have a website, and we're changing over to more of a broader approach in discovering ethics under the brand ethicsdaily.com.
Okay.
Ethics matters every day of your life, no matter who you are.
Right.
You need to have this theoretical ethic that you live by, this worldview that you live by. But it's not enough to just have that as a theoretical ethic. It must be implemented on a daily basis. And how do you apply that in life?
It is interesting that I think John Howard Yoder was the theologian who maybe first said that the church doesn't have a politics. The church is politics.
Sure, yeah.
That is to say, we are a political body, and it's not that the church is some sort of spiritual bubble that then you go out from the doors of the church and you enter into a life of political conversation and discourse. But in fact,
Yeah.
the way we treat one another, the values that we hold, these are all ways that we embody
Sure.
the things that we believe are true.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. You know, and politics obviously has a nasty connotation to it these
Right,
days,
right.
and well deserved. But the reality is, politics is the art of creating policy.
Yeah.
Whether that is a personal policy and how I conduct my life in a very personal manner,
Right.
to the point of a social politic of how we create policy for not only our country but for the world and other people. And so how we formulate that policy or politic, personal politic or social politic, is always been at the heart of the church.
Yes.
I mean, you're exactly right in what Yoder pointed out,
Right.
that politics has always been a part of us. We are politicians in nature because we're always creating policy, whether it's a personal policy or social policy.
So it seems to me that if you look at the landscape of Christianity, and this goes, I think, also for other religions as well, there is always this sense of whether we have more of an ethic that's about, or a faith that's about a personal spiritual piety with God, or a kind of horizontal
Right.
social piety that involves the way we deal with one another. And it does seem that traditionally some Christians have had more of a sense that sin and ethics and things that we care about are about keeping your heart pure, about
Right.
keeping your family pure, and those sorts of things, a kind of private world. And then the more progressive vein of Christianity seems to have focused more on the social or public realm.
Sure.
How does the Baptist Center for Ethics put those two things together? Do you feel like those are both part of your emphasis, or are you more one than the other?
Yeah. Well, it's really at the the crossroad of the common good.
Yes.
And when you're talking about a personal ethic,
Yeah.
this vertical relationship with God, you are developing this very internalized yet and private way of thinking about God, of thinking about conduct, behavior, and how you view the world.
Right.
But we must never forget we are social creatures by nature.
Yes.
In the beginning, God created humanity.
Right.
When man was isolated, he created someone for man to be with. And we must never forget that. And even in the first few chapters of the Bible, there is this community nature. First thing Jesus does before he sets out on his 3-year ministry is what? He creates community.
Right.
Because
Calls
he
his apostles.
calls his
disciples.
apostles. Yeah. And so there's this community ethic, and
Right.
and we are social creatures by nature. So how we develop a personal ethic plays out in the social.
Right.
You know, love God and love your neighbor are not divorced.
Right.
They are intimately connected
Yes.
to one another.
And when Christians look at what's going on in American society today, there seems to be either a cheering for a certain kind of ethical approach that is more about our tribe and
Sure.
our privileges that are under assault by those who are other to us.
Right.
Or there is a discomfort with that and a difficulty in knowing how to speak critically without sounding like we are, I don't know, just negative Nellies out there
Yeah.
in the public square at
Right,
the same
sure.
time.
Yeah.
So what do you teach pastors, and how do you guide people to address these kind of public concerns?
Yeah. Well, not to oversimplify it, but the reality is Jesus is our perfect model when it comes to what we're dealing with today. This tribalism that we find ourselves in. We've always been a tribal type of people. We hang out and socialize and are formed by our tribe. And Jesus was too, in a very Jewish sense. But when he began his ministry, he made it very clear that he was going to be welcoming and inclusive to people who were different than him.
Wow.
And not only welcoming, but he went out and embraced them.
All right.
So often we have this mentality, we're going to be a tribe, and then if people come to us, we're going to make ourselves feel better and open our arms and welcome them.
Right.
But Jesus went out and sought them out.
Right.
And he went out and sought them out and not only welcomed them, but engaged them where they were and empowered them with his inclusivity and his idea of ethics. And it was wonderful to see, and it's a model for us to mimic today.
You know, it reminds me of a person a friend of mine who once was a member of our church, and I asked him how he came to be a member of our church. It was years before I got there. And he said, well, you know, I grew up in the Midwest, and he said, I grew up in this particular tradition, I'll not name, of Christianity. And when I came to Dallas, I went immediately to that church. And I met with the pastor, and we were thinking of putting our family there. And I asked, you know, what's the mission of this church? And the pastor told him, it's to get as many people like you, so that we will be able to continue this tradition of people like us in our church. And immediately he said to himself, oh my, I can't be a member of this church.
Right, sure.
Because, you know, that kind of internal exclusivism of people that just look like us and feel like us is a kind of incestual problem of the church that is, if it's really following Jesus, it's not being faithful.
Right.
If that's its approach.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And one of the most detrimental things to Christian ethics these days is this sense of demonizing the other for who they are.
Yeah.
You know, it seems there's this natural sense that we have in ourselves to dehumanize another person simply by the way they look, or the God that they worship, or the part of the world they live in. And it's detrimental and opposed to the gospel itself, especially the gospel of Jesus Christ. And we must, as a people of faith, embrace this idea of inclusivity, and not only welcome people that are different than us, but engage them, go out where they are, because we've earned the reputation of being exclusionary.
Right.
And we can no longer afford that because we live in the same world.
What do you say to pastors who really want to do what you're saying here? Christian leaders, in their heart, they know that what you're saying is true. Yeah. But it's really difficult, the pushback you get sometimes when you preach that way, or when you try to lead a church to embrace the other, and it's discomforting, it's disorienting to people. They have to have new experiences with strangers, and to rethink sometimes their own structure of belief, and yet we're called to do this work. What help do you give to pastors and encouragement about that?
Begin with relationships.
Okay.
Mimic that as an example for your congregation.
Okay.
Perfect example for me in the last 11 years when I was pastoring in Norman, Oklahoma. Lot of animosity in the state of Oklahoma towards people of the Muslim faith.
Right.
And I developed a relationship with the imam in Oklahoma City, Imad and Johnson. And it began just by having lunch, having contacts with him, getting to know him, getting to know his family, inviting him to church, inviting me to the mosque, letting people see us together.
Okay, modeling that.
Just modeling it to the point where I was able to stand up in front of the congregation and tell them, when you criticize somebody, a Muslim, you're no longer criticizing a Muslim, or I no longer see Imad as an imam or a Muslim. He's a friend. Right. And don't you dare pick on my friend.
Very good. Very good.
And when they began to those barriers that we set up began to fall, all of a sudden we have this shared humanity with one another. And when people are able to see a genuine, authentic relationship modeled for them, they may be able to replicate that in their own life. So I would tell pastors, be intentional. Okay. Engage people who are different than you and model that for your congregation.
Well, Mitch, we were talking about tribalism
Yeah.
a few moments ago, and I think we're going to take a break right now and promote a nonprofit that's doing work for the common good. But when we come back, I want to hear more. I want people to know a little bit about your own experience of tribalism per se.
Yeah, great.
It's very personal.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Fellowship Southwest is the new Cooperative Baptist Fellowship Network that embraces and ministers alongside CBF of Oklahoma, CBF Texas, and CBF West, partnering with Jesus to make the world a more compassionate and just place to live. It's about multicultural and ecumenical relationships to facilitate missions, strengthen congregations, develop young leaders, and to advocate causes dear to the heart of Jesus.
Well, Mitch, you're an Oklahoma native.
Yeah.
And I was just in Oklahoma last week, and it seems to me like every time I cross another highway, I've moved from the state of Oklahoma into Indian territory.
Right. Sure.
Right. And it really is one of those states that has a tremendous Native American presence.
Right.
Your name is Mitch Randall, but there's more to you than that Anglo-sounding name.
That's right. That's exactly
You have
right.
another name.
I do. I absolutely do. Everybody knows me by Mitch Randall, but my given name, given to me by a Comanche code talker, Charles Chibetty, is Namukatsu, which means buffalo.
Okay.
While my name was given to me by a Comanche, I am Muskogee Creek by birth. My grandmother was the last full-blood Native American in our family, and she passed away years ago. But it's an ancestry that I absolutely cherish.
Okay. Well, what did you learn from that ancestry growing up in your family history and in the stories you learned that you carry with you throughout your life and in your work?
You know, George, earlier in our conversation, we were talking about the idea of an exclusionist worldview versus an inclusive worldview. And my ancestry and lineage really has played a big part in influencing who I am today. When my great-grandmother was brought to Indian Territory in now the state of Oklahoma, she was separated from her family, similar to what's going on today at the border of America and Mexico. But she was separated from her family and sent to a Native American called Indian Agricultural School by the Oklahoma-Kansas border. Her and her sister were taken there because there was a philosophy in this country to save the person, you had to kill the Indian.
Wow.
Sometimes that was literal.
Yeah.
But philosophically, that meant to stamp out every aspect of their culture possibly.
Okay.
And so they were sent to these agricultural schools that was funded by the federal government, but run by Christian missionaries.
Yes.
And the first thing that my great-grandmother and her sister experienced was they were immediately, their hair was cut. And the long, beautiful black hair of Native Americans is sacred to them in their culture. And it was cut into the form of a more civilized people. They were not allowed to speak their native tongue, English only. You hear those echoes today, don't you?
Yeah, you really do.
And when they were caught speaking Muskogee Creek, they were whipped. Each and every Sunday morning, they were forced to attend church services. And if they were caught skipping, as little girls do from time to time, wanting to go take a swim down at the pond, they were beaten severely. All under the eyes of the federal government and under the responsibility of Christian missionaries. And so my ancestors felt the sting of this exclusionary worldview and this attempt to assimilate people of color, of other cultures into this European mindset, to strip them of their identity, to make them fit the mold that makes others feel more, the white ruling class feel, like they're doing good.
You know, the critique of colonialism is usually made about colonialism in places like Africa, South America, and the like, but we had our own version here in the United States with Native Americans, as you're describing. And it does seem to be that somehow we got it into our head that Christ was the property of the church.
Right.
And if we could bring Christ with us and introduce Christ to people who did not know him, then we would be doing a service to the rest of the world. Although what we're now sort of going back and circling back to realize is that Christ has never been the property of the church.
No.
He's actually beaten us there and has been at work in other people's religious lives in kind of a beautiful, anonymous way.
Right.
And what could Christians learn from Native American spirituality if we were listening and learning rather than just talking and teaching?
Yeah. Well, you know, this has been fascinating to me as I've traveled around the world to places like Africa and other places where I discover a historical tribalism.
Right.
But also this ability to embrace Jesus and his teachings probably more genuinely and authentically than we have ever done so in the West.
Yes.
Because this idea of tribalism, that you're expanding your tribe. But it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to look like you or they're going to sound like you. But this idea of welcoming people of different tribes into your tribe and learning from their culture and learning from each other. As far as Native American is concerned, I saw elements of Christianity in their culture that have been rooted there far before Christian missionaries started to evangelize them.
Right.
Their deep-seated anguish for the poor. I'll never forget attending powwows as a young boy. And I remember watching a family being taken to the center drum area. And I remember asking my grandmother, you know, what's going on? Because this family was taken there and this beautiful Native American blanket was spread out in front of them, and the drums began to beat and people began to dance around in this circle and dance around the family. They were honoring the family, but the community knew. And it wasn't a matter of shame. The community knew that this family was on hard times.
Wow.
And so as people would dance around them and honoring them with this dance, they would lay bread and money and tobacco at their feet, because they knew that they had a responsibility to take care of them.
Wow.
They didn't get this from Christian missionaries. It was ingrained in them in their spirituality. So when they hear about Jesus doing the very same thing, about feeding the hungry and empowering the poor and welcoming the stranger and visiting the prisoner, they see him
have
as one
more of a community emphasis where the individual is part of a community, and the community comes first in a sense, whereas in a lot of our Western thinking, it's about the individual and the personal responsibility of the individual, and the community is an afterthought almost. But in the New Testament, clearly the church has a more communitarian understanding of the faith.
And that's a perfect example. And what I really love about both the Native American culture and the African culture is their ability to address critical issues, whether those are localized or more generalized. Their ability to come to consensus on issues. The Western mindset is you and I to debate an issue. You bring your position, I bring my position, and we argue. And whoever has the best argument wins the day.
Right. Or whoever has the most money.
That's probably more accurate. In ancient cultures that are rooted in this ancient tribalism, not the tribalism that we see today, the elders sit around and they hear everyone make arguments. And we would characterize it as talking the issue to death.
Yes.
But they talk about it and assess it from every angle possible until a consensus begins to emerge within the community.
Okay, interesting.
And it's a different way of problem solving. It's a different way of conducting or addressing ethical dilemmas that your culture is facing. But it makes certain everybody has a voice in it.
Right.
And everybody's representative.
So we don't have a consensus today on one particular matter that is dear to your heart and concerning right now to all of us, and that is immigration policy, refugee status, asylum seekers. And what we're seeing is a government policy now that is intended to discourage people from illegal immigration, from crossing the border as undocumented, and that is when we catch them and they cross the border, we separate children from their parents as a way of making sure that they pay a penalty for that they don't want to pay. How do we as Christians address a matter of the difference between a nation's right to make laws and to guard its borders and to have those laws observed on the one hand, and on the other, as Christians, to deal with this basic humanity, the welcome of the stranger, family values, and those sorts of things. What are you telling churches and people right now as we're wrestling with this?
Well, first of all, no one is advocating for an open border policy.
Yes. Right.
You know, there is a realization that no matter what country you are going to have policies that protect your borders and manage those borders. And so that's a reality. Everybody understands that. And that needs to be addressed.
Yes.
And there needs to be border security addressed, and refugee policies addressed, and immigration policies addressed. There's no doubt about that. What we are seeing taking place on our southern border now is a humanitarian crisis.
Okay.
We have people fleeing violence. We have people fleeing poverty and hunger. You know, a lot of people want to frame this conversation as an immigration issue. This is a human migration issue.
Okay.
Because these are decent, wonderful, beautiful people made in the image of God.
Right.
And they are simply wanting to live their life. First of all, to live their life, because many of them are dying where they are currently residing, and to let their family prosper and live in peace. If you and I were in a context like that, we would do everything possible to get our families out of that.
Right.
And if that means crossing the border illegally, then by God, we would do it, because our family comes first.
Right. So one of the things that occurs to me about all of this is that some of this has to do with what becomes of those who do cross illegally, but some of this has to do with who we are as a people, as an American people. And we once were a people that understood that we were laying out a welcome mat for the world's oppressed and for those who were fleeing for freedom and opportunity. It seems that we have reached a point now where many people want to define America differently.
I boil it down to American exceptionalism.
Okay.
When we were forming ourselves as a country, we were more welcoming of the immigrants who were crossing the border, or crossing the Atlantic, coming into America. Now, we can never forget, though, we did that at the same time as we were sending Native Americans on the Trail of Tears.
Well, and the transatlantic trade,
and we were
slave trade was happening at the same time.
Exactly right.
Yes, right.
So, you know, while we like to champion this welcoming of immigrants, Statue of Liberty type of country, we can never forget what we've done in the past. Those have always existed side by side. When Winthrop talked about the city on the hill, the new America being America being the New Jerusalem, it set into motion this idea of American exceptionalism. That somehow we are better than anybody in the world. And we love to tout that as Americans. I love this country. I love everything about it. I love the freedom. You know, I love living here. But we've got to be honest about who we are. And the reality is, people who live south of our border are no less of a person than the people who live north of that border.
Right.
And they have rights just like we have rights.
Right.
And we have this shared humanity as a people of God to stand up for our brothers and sisters and love them and embrace them and empower them as much as we can.
Well, Mitch, you are proclaiming that truth, holding forth among us as Baptists and teaching us how to live that. Thank you for your work. We're grateful to be partners with you.
It's been a great being here. Thank you, George.
You bet, Mitch.
Okay.
Good.
Fellowship Southwest is the new cooperative Baptist fellowship network that embraces and ministers alongside CBF of Oklahoma, CBF Texas, and CBF West, partnering with Jesus to make the world a more compassionate and just place to live. It's about multicultural and ecumenical relationships to facilitate missions, strengthen congregations, develop young leaders, and to advocate causes dear to the heart of Jesus.